Ryan Sterling slid his black card across the hotel concierge desk in Paris and whispered something that made the young woman behind the counter blush, not because it was romantic, because standing 3 feet away, his wife was on the phone back in New York, and he didn't even bother to lower his voice. He booked the honeymoon suite, for 2, under a different name. Then he straightened his tie, smiled at his reflection in the marble lobby mirror, and thought, perfect. He had no idea that the woman he just betrayed owned the building he was standing in. If this story makes your blood boil, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. There is a particular kind of arrogance that only grows in men who have never once been told no. Ryan Sterling had been told yes his entire life. Yes to the funding. Yes to the deal. Yes to the cover of Fortune magazine 3 years running. Yes to the penthouse on the Upper East Side with 17-foot ceilings and a kitchen his wife cooked in every single morning while he sat at the breakfast table scrolling through his phone without ever looking up. He was 45 years old, and he genuinely believed in the deepest, most unexamined part of himself that he had built his life entirely on his own. That was the first lie he told himself. The second lie was that his wife didn't notice anything. Victoria Sterling, née Victoria. Elaine Marchetti had been born in a small apartment above her father's tailor shop in Philadelphia. Her mother worked double shifts at a hospital laundry. Her father pressed the suits of wealthy men and smiled at them and called them sir. Victoria had watched all of that growing up, and she had learned 2 things very early. First, that wealth was not the same thing as power, and second, that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone has already dismissed. She was 43 now, still beautiful in the way that certain women become more beautiful as they age, not despite the years, but because of them. There was a quiet steadiness in her dark eyes that people sometimes mistook for patience. It wasn't patience, it was precision. She had met Ryan when they were both 24. He was brilliant then, genuinely brilliant, with a startup idea that was ahead of its time, and a hunger she had found magnetic. She had believed in him before anyone else did. She had sat with him at kitchen tables covered in napkins full of equations. She had introduced him to her father's clients' old-money Philadelphia families who became his first investors. She had edited his pitch decks at 2 in the morning and never put her name on a single one. And then Ryan Sterling became famous. And slowly, without either of them quite acknowledging it, Victoria became furniture. Not overnight. That's never how it happens. It was gradual, the way a room gets cold when someone leaves a window open. You don't notice until you're already shivering. First, it was the dinners. He stopped asking her to join client dinners because he said, it gets complicated with the wives there. Then it was the travel. He started taking assistants instead of her because, you're better with the household stuff anyway, Vic. Then it was the conversations. He stopped finishing stories. He started telling her because his phone would buzz and he'd pick it up mid-sentence and never come back. And Victoria watched all of it. She cataloged it. She filed it away in a place inside herself that was very organized and very quiet and very, very patient. She did not cry about it. Not anymore. She worked. 3 years before the Paris trip, Victoria had done something that would seem to anyone who didn't know her entirely out of character. She had quietly, systematically, and with extraordinary precision begun restructuring her financial life. It started small. A conversation with her personal attorney, not the firm Ryan used, but her own attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Hale, who wore no-nonsense blazers and had a reputation in Manhattan's legal circles for being absolutely terrifying in depositions. Victoria had walked into Patricia's office on a Tuesday afternoon in November and placed a folder on her desk. I need to understand, Victoria said, exactly what I own. Patricia looked at the folder. Then she looked at Victoria. How long have you been thinking about this? Patricia asked. About 6 years, Victoria said. But I'm ready to act now. What followed was 18 months of quiet, brilliant financial engineering that nobody, not Ryan, not his board, not his personal CFO, ever saw coming. Because nobody was watching Victoria. Nobody had been watching Victoria for years. And that invisibility which had once felt like a wound had become her greatest weapon. She began by liquidating certain personal assets that were entirely in her name: jewelry, some real estate in her maiden name, a small inheritance from her grandmother that she had never mentioned to Ryan because he had never asked. The total was not enormous by the standards of their world, but it was enough to begin. She called a man named Claude Beaumont. He was 71 years old, semi-retired, and widely considered the most discreet private equity advisor in the northeastern United States. He had known Victoria's father. He had watched her grow up. When she explained what she wanted to do, he was quiet for a long moment on the phone. Then he said, "Your father always said you were the smart one." He said that, "Every time I pressed his suits," Claude said, "every single time." She didn't cry then either, but it was a close thing. Over the next 18 months, Claude helped Victoria quietly acquire minority stakes in 3 companies that on the surface appeared to have nothing to do with Ryan's world: a textile import company in northern Italy, a logistics firm based in Luxembourg, a mid-size investment vehicle registered in Delaware that held, among other things, significant debt positions in 2 of Ryan's subsidiary companies. She learned the language of leverage. She learned the geography of debt. She learned that in the world of high finance, the person who holds the note has more real power than the person whose name is on the door. And while she learned all of this, she kept making Ryan's breakfast. She kept hosting his dinner parties. She kept remembering his colleagues' anniversaries and their children's names and their dietary restrictions and every small detail that made Ryan look thoughtful and attentive and human when increasingly he was none of those things. She kept showing up, because that was the plan. Now, the morning before Ryan left for Paris, Victoria stood in their kitchen making coffee. Real coffee, not the pod machine, but the kind that took time, the kind her mother had taught her. She heard Ryan on the phone in the hallway. She could hear him clearly. "No, she thinks it's a business trip," Ryan said. "She never asks anymore. That's the beautiful thing about Vic. She just accepts things." A pause, then a low laugh. "Just pack light. The suite has everything. I already checked." Victoria set down the coffee cup with the precise, controlled movement of a woman who has had 3 years to practice not reacting. She breathed in. She breathed out. Then she picked up her own phone and sent a text to Patricia Hale. The text said, "Only Paris is confirmed. Proceed to Phase 2. She heard Ryan end his call and come into the kitchen. He was already dressed navy suit, the one she had picked out for him 2 Christmases ago. He smelled like the cologne she'd bought him for his birthday. He was using everything she'd given him to go meet someone else. "Morning," he said, not looking at her, already reaching for the coffee she'd made. "I'm heading out early. Car's coming at 8. "I know," Victoria said. "I'll be back Sunday. The Hartley dinner is Tuesday, right? You'll take care of that." "Of course," she said. He picked up his coffee. He drank it. He put the cup in the sink, not in the dishwasher, just in the sink where he always left it for her to deal with, and he picked up his bag. "Don't wait up," he said, which was a strange thing to say to someone you were supposedly leaving for 4 days. "I never do," Victoria said softly. He didn't hear her. He was already halfway to the door. Victoria stood in the kitchen for a moment after she heard the elevator close. Then she walked to the window and watched the black car pull up below. She watched Ryan slide into the back seat without looking up at the building, without looking up at her. She picked up her phone again and made a different call. "He's on his way to the airport," she said when the line connected. "And Madison?" asked the voice on the other end, a woman with a slight French accent. Her name was Isabelle Laurent, and she was, depending on how you looked at it, either Victoria's most important business partner or the most elegant chess piece on the board. "Already at the terminal, I assume," Victoria said. "Let them get comfortable. Let them believe it." "And the show." Victoria looked out the window at the New York skyline. The morning light was doing something extraordinary to the buildings, turning them amber and gold, making everything look like it was on fire. "The show is ready," she said. "Everything is exactly where it needs to be." She hung up. She finished her coffee. Then she sat down at her kitchen table, the same table where she and Ryan had once covered every inch of surface with napkins full of dreams, and she opened her laptop and began reviewing one final time the financial architecture of what she had built. It was beautiful, it was precise, and it was completely, utterly invisible to the man currently heading to JFK with another woman. Madison Hart was 29 years old and had 4.2 million Instagram followers and the absolute, unshakable conviction that she was about to become famous. Not influencer famous, actually famous. The kind of famous that got you on magazine covers and in documentaries and at tables where real decisions were made. She had been seeing Ryan Sterling for 11 months. She knew he was married. She told herself and her best friend Kayla over wine that Victoria was basically just a business partner at this point, that Ryan had told her the marriage was over in every way that mattered, that these things were complicated when you were at a certain level. Kayla had made a face when Madison said that. What Madison had said. Nothing, Kayla said. It's just that's what they all say. Ryan is different, Madison said firmly. Kayla had looked down at her wine. On the plane to Paris, Madison sat next to Ryan in the private cabin and felt for the first time genuinely certain that she had won. This was it. Paris, Fashion Week, being seen with one of the most powerful men in American tech. This was the moment that would change everything. She didn't know that she was sitting in a cabin registered to a shell company that Victoria had quietly acquired partial ownership of 8 months earlier through a Luxembourg holding structure that would have made her head spin if anyone had explained it to her. She didn't know a lot of things. Ryan poured champagne. He was in a good mood, expansive, generous in the way wealthy men get when they feel untouchable. He told Madison stories about his early days, the startup years, the scrappy brilliance of it all. He did not mention in any of these stories that his wife had been in every single one of those rooms with him. "You know what I love about you," he said to Madison, handing her a glass. She leaned in. "You see me," he said. "Victoria, she stopped seeing me years ago. She's just there, like part of the house." Madison nodded sympathetically. 30,000 feet below in the apartment he'd just called the house, Victoria was on a video call with 3 people, Claude Beaumont, Patricia Hale, and Isabelle Laurent. They were reviewing the final sequence of events, point by point, contingency by contingency. "He'll figure out something is off by day 2, Claude said. "Credit cards." "Flagged for review," Patricia said. "Entirely legal. His corporate accounts have a compliance audit trigger that I had inserted 18 months ago. It activates based on international travel patterns combined with certain expense categories." "He's going to be furious," Claude said. "He's going to be confused," Victoria corrected. "That's different. Furious men make noise. Confused men make mistakes." "And the reservations?" Isabel asked from Paris. "His assistant booked through the usual channels," Victoria said. "Channels that as of 48 hours ago, I have some degree of influence over." Isabel smiled on screen. "The hotel called this morning. They're very sorry, but the penthouse suite had a water issue. They've relocated Monsieur Sterling to a junior suite." Claude laughed a real warm old man's laugh. "Victoria," he said, "your father would have loved this." Victoria smiled. It was a small smile. Not triumphant, not yet. "Save the celebration for Sunday," she said. "We still have work to do." She closed the laptop and sat for a moment in the silence of her penthouse apartment. 17-foot ceilings, the kitchen where she'd made his coffee that morning, the life she'd built around a man who'd stopped seeing her. She thought about the girl she'd been in Philadelphia watching her father press other men's suits. She thought about what her father had told her once when she was maybe 10 years old and had come home from school crying because a girl in her class had said something cruel. Tesoro. He'd said his little word for her Italian for treasure. The people who overlook you are always the most surprised when you arrive. Victoria stood up from the table. She had a plane to catch, her own plane, her own seat, her own plans. And in 48 hours, when Ryan Sterling walked into the most important fashion event of the European season, he was going to discover something that would rewrite every assumption he'd ever made about the woman he'd married and ignored and called part of the house. He was going to discover that the house was hers. All of it. Every single room. And the door he thought he could walk back through whenever he felt like it. She had already changed the locks. Ryan Sterling had been to Paris 11 times in his life, and every single time the city had treated him like a king. This time was different. It started at the hotel. Not dramatically, that was the thing about the way Victoria worked. Nothing she did was dramatic at the moment it happened. It was only later looking back that you understood the architecture of it. The junior suite was fine. It was more than fine by any normal standard. High ceilings, good linens, a view that made Madison pull out her phone immediately. But it was not the penthouse, and Ryan had booked the penthouse. He stood at the front desk with his jaw set in that particular way he had when he was angry, but trying to appear calm, which he had never been very good at. The manager, a composed Frenchman in his 50s named Edouard, expressed his apologies with the polished sorrow of a man who has delivered bad news to powerful people many times and has learned that sincerity, real or performed, is the only thing that works. Monsieur Sterling, I assure you it was entirely unexpected. A pipe in the ceiling. These old buildings, they have their moods. I don't care about the building's moods, Ryan said. I care about my reservation. Of course. And we have accommodated you in our finest available, I want the penthouse. It is unavailable, monsieur. I am deeply sorry. Ryan looked at the man for a long moment. Then he looked at Madison, who was still photographing the lobby, already posting, already narrating her Paris experience to 4 million people who had no idea the man behind her was standing at a hotel desk losing an argument. He pulled out his phone. He called his assistant Derek, who had booked the trip. Derek, what happened with the hotel? Derek's voice came through tense and confused. I'm not sure, Mr. Sterling. The confirmation I have shows the penthouse. Let me call them directly. You're looking at them, Ryan said. Figure it out. He hung up. He looked at Edouard. Edouard looked back with the expression of a man who has already said everything he has to say on the subject. They took the junior suite. Madison told him it was beautiful. She meant it, which somehow made it worse. She didn't understand that the point wasn't the room. The point was that something had gone wrong, and Ryan Sterling's things did not go wrong. His life was engineered against wrongness. That was what money was for. He shook it off. Minor inconvenience. First world problem, as his PR team would say. The real trouble started the next morning. Ryan had a breakfast meeting with 2 executives from a French luxury conglomerate men he had been cultivating for months for a potential partnership that he expected to anchor the next phase of his company's European expansion. He had confirmed the meeting 3 times through Derek. The restaurant was one of the most exclusive in the 8th arrondissement. The kind of place where you needed to know someone to even get a table, and Ryan knew everyone. Except when he arrived, the maitre d' checked the reservation book twice, looked up with an expression of careful neutrality, and said that the table was not in his system. Ryan felt something shift in his chest. Not panic, not yet. More like the first rumble of something underground, the way the ground feels just before you realize it's moving. He called Derek again. Derek confirmed the reservation existed in his records. The restaurant confirmed it did not exist in theirs. Someone somewhere had made an error. Or someone had made a decision. He didn't think that yet, not consciously. But somewhere underneath the logic, his body knew something was wrong before his mind was willing to say it. He took Madison to a different cafe. She was delighted she found the spontaneity charming, photographed her croissant from 4 angles, called it an authentic Parisian morning. Ryan sat across from her and drank his espresso, and felt for the first time in a very long time, slightly off balance. By afternoon, his corporate card had been declined at a boutique on Rue Saint-Honoré. He had been trying to buy Madison a bracelet. She had admired it in the window casually, not demanding, just the kind of admiring that beautiful young women do in expensive shop windows. And Ryan had steered her inside because that was who he was, a man who turned admiration into acquisition. It was practically a reflex. The card came back declined. The sales associate, a young woman who had clearly dealt with this before and managed to convey sympathy without judgment, suggested he try another card. He tried 3 more. 2 came back with a processing error. 1 went through, but it was a personal card, not corporate, and the limit was lower than he remembered it being, which made no sense, and the transaction took 40 seconds longer than it should have, which also made no sense. He bought the bracelet. Madison thanked him. She didn't notice his hands weren't quite steady. In the car back to the hotel, he called his CFO, a careful man named Gerald Marsh, who had worked for him for 9 years and who answered on the second ring. "Gerald," Ryan said, keeping his voice even, "what's happening with the corporate accounts?" A pause that lasted 1 beat too long. There's a compliance review that flagged this morning," Gerald said. "Triggered by some international transaction patterns. It's probably nothing. We're working through it." "Compliance review," Ryan repeated. "Since when do we have compliance reviews that freeze cards without a 48-hour notice to me? It's built into the new protocol, from the restructuring last year. There's a clause. Pull the clause, read it to me. Another pause. Ryan could hear Gerald pulling something up on his computer. It says, and I'm reading directly, international expenditure patterns inconsistent with declared business purpose may trigger a temporary account review of up to 72 hours initiated by the compliance officer or any authorized signatory of equivalent standing. Ryan was quiet. Who's the authorized signatory of equivalent standing? He asked. Gerald's voice went careful in a way Ryan didn't like. On the board paperwork from the 2021 restructuring, the designated secondary signatory is Gerald. Victoria Sterling, sir. The car was moving through Paris traffic. Outside the window, the city looked exactly like itself, beautiful and indifferent, and entirely unbothered by the fact that Ryan Sterling's world was making a sound like ice beginning to crack. She triggered the review, Ryan said. It wasn't a question. I can't confirm that without more investigation. It could be an automated... She triggered it, Ryan said. Get me off this call, Gerald. Get me answers by tonight. He hung up. Madison was looking at her phone, showing him something on her screen, a comment someone had left on her latest post. Something funny. She was laughing. She didn't notice that Ryan wasn't listening. She didn't notice his face. He looked out the window and thought about his wife in their New York penthouse. Quiet. Reliable. Part of the house, he had called her, and he had meant it as a statement of fact, the way you might say a bookshelf is part of the library. Just there. Useful in its way. Background. For the first time, he felt the faintest flicker of something that might in a lesser man have been called unease. He pushed it down. There was a rational explanation. There was always a rational explanation. Victoria was she probably didn't even know about the review. It was probably automated. Gerald said so. He told himself that. He nearly believed it. That evening, Ryan and Madison attended the first public event of Fashion Week, a cocktail reception hosted by a Belgian designer whose work Ryan didn't particularly understand, but whose guest list was impeccable. He went because being seen was a form of business, and Ryan Sterling was always doing business. The room was full of the particular kind of beautiful that only exists in European fashion circles, angular, expensive, effortless, in a way that costs an enormous amount of effort. Madison was radiant in it. She knew how to move in rooms like this. It was, Ryan had to admit, one of the things he found genuinely compelling about her. They moved through the crowd. People greeted Ryan warmly enough with the recognition that his name commanded. But something was slightly off. He couldn't put his finger on it immediately. It was the way conversations shifted when he approached. The way certain people's eyes moved past him just a fraction of a second too early. The way one fashion editor, a woman named Sophie Renaud, who had profiled him in a business supplement 3 years ago, smiled at him and then immediately said, as if it had just occurred to her, "And how is Victoria? I've been so looking forward to seeing her this week." Ryan blinked. She's in New York. Sophie's expression did something complicated that she smoothed over immediately. "Oh," she said. "I thought, well, she mentioned Paris. I must have misunderstood." She drifted away. Ryan watched her go. He found Madison at the bar 20 minutes later and said casually, as if he were just making conversation, "Do you know anything about a woman named Victoria Sterling?" Madison looked up from her drink. "Your wife, in the fashion world. Do you know her name?" Madison considered this. "I mean, I've seen it. In some industry contexts. There's a Marchetti group that does investment in European luxury brands. I always assumed it was her family or something. Why?" Ryan was quiet for a moment. "No reason," he said, but the name landed differently than he expected. The Marchetti group, Victoria's maiden name. He had known in the distant, uninterested way that wealthy husbands know their wives' backgrounds, that Victoria came from a family with some money, a Philadelphia tailoring business, some old connections. He had never looked into it further, because and this was the truth, and it was not a comfortable truth. He had never looked into Victoria at all. She was his wife. He knew everything he needed to know. He excused himself. He went to the bathroom. He stood at the sink and ran cold water over his wrists and looked at himself in the mirror. Then he typed Marchetti Group Fashion Investment into his phone. The results that came back made him very still. The Marchetti Group was not his wife's family. It was not a legacy holding company with a couple of real estate investments and some stocks. It was a private investment vehicle established 6 years ago with equity positions in 11 European luxury and fashion companies, 4 of which were major sponsors of this week's Fashion Week, and 1 of which held a controlling stake in the event itself. The founder was listed as V.E. Marchetti. V.E. Marchetti. Victoria Elaine. Ryan put his phone in his pocket. He stood there for 30 seconds. He was a man who prided himself on rapid information processing. It was he had always believed his core skill. He could look at a complex financial picture and understand it in moments. He could read a room. He could see angles others missed. He had missed every single angle in his own marriage. He walked back out into the party. A man he didn't know stopped him near the entrance. A tall man in his 60s, silver-haired, the kind of European businessman who wore his suit like a second skin. "Monsieur Sterling," the man said, extending a hand. "I believe I know your wife." "Do you?" Ryan said. "A remarkable woman. The work she has done with the Laurent Partnership alone extraordinary. You must be very proud." "The Laurent Partnership," Ryan repeated. "With Isabelle Laurent, for the collection." The man smiled. "But of course you know all about it." "Of course," Ryan said. He did not know a single thing about it. He found Madison and told her he had a headache. They left early. In the car, Madison curled against him and talked about the party and the outfits and a model she recognized, and Ryan sat with his jaw set and his mind moving fast, running calculations he should have run years ago. Back at the hotel after Madison fell asleep, he sat in the dark on the edge of the bed and called Gerald. "Tell me everything you know about the Marchetti Group," he said quietly. Gerald was quiet for a long time, long enough that Ryan knew before Gerald said a word that his CFO was not surprised by the question. "Gerald," he said, "how long have you known Mr. Sterling?" "How long?" "I became aware of the equity structure approximately 4 months ago during a routine audit. I brought it to the board's attention and was advised to—" "You were advised," Ryan said very slowly, "to not tell me. The board felt that given the complexity of the situation and the personal nature—" "The board," Ryan said, "my board, advised my CFO not to tell me that my wife owns significant positions in companies that are directly adjacent to my own financial interests." Silence. "How significant?" Ryan asked. More silence. Then Gerald said in the quiet voice of a man delivering news he has been dreading, "The Marchetti Group holds debt positions in 2 of our subsidiary companies. If those positions were called, if whoever controls them chose to accelerate the debt—" "Say it, Gerald. It would create a liquidity crisis that the board does not believe we could resolve without significant dilution of your personal shares, or in a worst case, say it." "Loss of operational control," Gerald said, "of the company." The room was dark. Beside him, Madison breathed evenly, sleeping. Ryan sat with his phone pressed to his ear and felt the floor of his carefully constructed world shift under him in a way that no amount of money or status or private jets could stabilize. "She built this while living in my house," he said, not to Gerald, mostly to himself. "Yes, sir," Gerald said anyway. "While making my breakfast, while hosting my dinners, while I was—" He stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence. The sentence ended with "while I was bringing another woman to Paris on her accounts." "Is there anything you need me to do tonight, sir?" Gerald asked. Ryan didn't answer right away. He was thinking about Sophie Renault's face when he said Victoria was in New York. That complicated expression she'd smoothed over so quickly. The expression of a person who knows something you don't. He was thinking about the man at the party. "You must be very proud." He was thinking about Victoria standing in the kitchen that morning pouring coffee, watching him with those dark eyes that he had stopped looking into years ago because he was always too busy looking at his phone. What had her face been doing? Had there been something there, some anticipation, some knowledge, some— He pressed his eyes shut. "No," he told Gerald. "Nothing tonight." He set the phone down. He lay back on the bed in the dark hotel room and stared at the ceiling and understood for the first time what it actually felt like to be underestimated. It felt exactly like this. like finding out the ground you've been standing on for years belongs to someone else, and they've known it the whole time, and they've been deciding quietly, patiently, precisely exactly when to tell you. He thought about calling Victoria. He picked up his phone twice. Both times he put it back down. What would he say? He didn't know enough yet. And calling her now from Paris with Madison asleep 3 feet away would be to admit something he wasn't ready to admit. So he lay there instead in the dark, in a junior suite, in a hotel that should have been a penthouse with a woman who thought she was winning, and a wife he had never once taken seriously, and he waited for morning, did. Across the city, in a suite that actually was a penthouse booked under VE. Marchetti paid in full. No compliance reviews. No flagged accounts. Victoria Sterling sat at a desk by the window with her laptop open and a cup of coffee at her elbow. Isabelle Laurent was on the screen. It was past midnight. He made calls tonight, Isabelle said. His CFO, the board. I know, Victoria said. Gerald is a decent man. He'll feel guilty about it. She paused. He should have told Ryan months ago. Does that bother you? That Gerald stayed quiet? Victoria thought about that honestly, the way she thought about most things. It tells me, she said finally, that the board already knew what I was capable of, and they calculated that protecting me was more valuable than informing Ryan. She looked at the screen. That's not guilt. That's leverage, and it means I have more allies in that building than Ryan realizes. Isabelle was quiet for a moment. Then she said, He's going to come looking for you tomorrow. Let him look, Victoria said. He spent 19 years not looking. He can spend 1 day in Paris trying. And when he finds you, Victoria looked out the window at the city. The lights, the river somewhere out there in the dark. He won't find me, she said, not until I'm ready to be found. And when that moment comes, it won't be in a hotel hallway or a restaurant. It will be in front of everyone. She closed the laptop halfway. How is the collection? Ready, Isabelle said. Every piece, every screen, every sequence. A pause. It's a masterpiece, Victoria, honestly. It's a statement, Victoria said. There's a difference. She said goodnight to Isabelle. She sat for another moment with her coffee. She thought about Ryan lying in that junior suite right now running calculations in the dark. She had spent 19 years watching him calculate. She knew exactly how his mind worked, the confidence of it, the speed, the absolute certainty that he could buy his way out of any problem and logic his way through any obstacle. He had never once calculated for her. That had been his only mistake, but it had been enough. She finished her coffee. She set the cup down. She went to the window and looked out at Paris, at the city that had been saying her name all week, at the industry that had watched her build something extraordinary, while her husband looked the other way, at the stage that was being set right now for the most important moment of her life. She pressed one hand flat against the glass, cold against her palm. 2 more days, she said quietly, to no one, to herself, to the city. 2 more days, and everything Ryan Sterling believed about his life would be proven wrong in front of the entire world. She turned off the light. She went to bed. She slept perfectly. Ryan Sterling did not sleep after 2 in the morning. He lay in that junior suite with the city humming outside and his mind running in circles so tight they were starting to feel like a drain. Every time he got close to something that felt like a conclusion, it slipped sideways and became another question. How long had she been building this? How did she learn the language of debt acquisition and equity structures when, as far as he had ever known, Victoria's financial literacy extended to managing their household accounts and her charitable giving? Who had helped her? Who had she talked to? Who in his world? And the thought landed like something physical. Who in his world had known before he did? He got up at 6. He dressed quietly. He left Madison a note that said he had early calls, which was the kind of excuse she had been trained over 11 months not to question. He went down to the hotel restaurant alone and ordered coffee and sat with his phone and tried to reconstruct from the outside the shape of what his wife had built. The Marchetti Group. V.E. Marchetti. He searched every variation. He found the Luxembourg holding structure. He found the Italian textile company Tessuti del Nord, which he vaguely recognized as a supplier to several fashion houses, but had never connected to anything personal. He found the logistics firm. And then he found something that made him set his coffee cup down very carefully on its saucer. One of the Marchetti Group's portfolio companies was a media and events firm called Laurent Marchetti Productions. Laurent, as in Isabelle Laurent, as in the woman who was producing the biggest fashion show of Fashion Week, the one he and Madison had VIP seats to on Saturday night, the one that every major editor, every luxury CEO, every camera in Paris would be trained on. He sat with that information for a full minute. Then he called Patricia Hale's office in New York. He didn't know Patricia Hale personally. She was not the kind of attorney who moved in his circles, which he now understood was entirely intentional. But he had her name from Gerald, who had pulled it from the board documents. Her assistant answered. "I need to speak with Ms. Hale immediately," Ryan said. "My name is Ryan Sterling." A pause. "Ms. Hale is unavailable, Mr. Sterling. May I take a message?" "Tell her it concerns the Marchetti Group and a matter of financial conflict of interest that I believe requires her client's immediate attention." Another pause. Longer. "I'll pass along the message," the assistant said. Patricia Hale did not call back. Ryan had not genuinely expected her to, but he had wanted to fire a warning shot to signal that he knew that he was paying attention, that the game had changed. What he didn't understand yet was that Victoria had already accounted for this move. She had accounted for all his moves. She had been accounting for them for 3 years. By 9 in the morning, he had called 4 board members. 2 didn't answer. One, Charles Whitfield, a man who had known Ryan for 15 years and played golf with him twice a month, picked up and immediately said before Ryan could speak, "Ryan, I think you should come home." "Tell me what you know, Charles." "I think this is a conversation for New York, in person, with counsel present." "Charles, tell me what you know." A breath. "We've been aware of the Marchetti positions for about 5 months. The board's legal team assessed the situation and determined that given the structure of the holdings, there was no current violation of any agreement. The positions are legally held. There's nothing we can do about them unilaterally." "She's my wife," Ryan said. "She's also technically an independent financial entity whose holdings exist entirely outside your marital estate due to the structure of her personal trusts," Charles said, "which I understand sounds—" "She structured her trusts to make her holdings invisible from the marital estate," Ryan said flatly. "Her attorneys are very good," Charles said. Ryan was quiet. "Come home, Ryan," Charles said again. "And I say this as someone who has known you a long time. Come home alone." Ryan hung up. He sat in the restaurant with the morning moving around him, waitstaff bringing bread to other tables, other guests living their uncomplicated lives, and he felt the specific humiliation of a man who has just been told by multiple people that everyone knew something before he did. He was still sitting there when Madison came downstairs fresh and bright and dressed for the day, sliding into the seat across from him with a smile that didn't know yet that it was unwelcome. "Good morning," she said. "You look terrible." "I didn't sleep." The call's something like that. He looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for one of the first times not at her beauty, which was genuine, but at her, the person. She was young, she was ambitious, she believed she was in the middle of a love story. She had no idea she was in the middle of something else entirely. "Madison," he said, "I need to ask you something directly." She put down her coffee. Her face went careful. "Okay. Did you know," he said, "anything about my wife's business interests before this trip? Did anyone tell you anything?" She stared at him. "What no? Ryan, what is going on?" "Nothing," he said. "Forget it." "That's not nothing. You just asked me if I knew something about your wife, like I'm some kind of—" She stopped. Something flickered across her face. "Is she here?" Ryan said nothing. Madison's eyes went wide. "Ryan, is Victoria in Paris?" "I don't know," he said, and the honest uncertainty in his voice was more frightening to her than a yes would have been, because Ryan Sterling always knew things. Ryan Sterling always had answers. Ryan Sterling sitting at a breakfast table saying, "I don't know," was in its way more alarming than anything she had encountered in 11 months of being with him. She picked up her coffee cup. She put it back down without drinking. "I want to go home," she said quietly. "We have the show Saturday," he said. "Ryan, we paid for the tickets. We're going." He said it the way he said most things, as a conclusion, not a discussion. The old reflex, the old certainty. Even now, even with the floor dissolving under him, his instinct was to project control. Madison looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded and looked away. And in that small capitulation, something shifted between them that neither of them named, but both of them felt. He spent the rest of Thursday making calls, pulling threads, trying to map the full shape of what Victoria had built. By Thursday evening, he had a clearer picture, and the clarity did not help. The Marchetti Group's positions were airtight. Every entity was properly incorporated, properly disclosed to the relevant regulatory bodies, properly structured to exist in a legal space entirely separate from the Sterling marital estate. Whoever had done this legal work, and Ryan was beginning to understand, it was Patricia Hale had done it, with the precision of someone who had anticipated every countermove. He tried one more thing on Thursday night. He called his own attorney, a man named Douglas Webb, who was aggressive and expensive and had never lost a case that Ryan cared about. Douglas listened. He asked 3 questions. Then he was quiet for a long time. "Ryan," he said finally, "I need you to understand something. The structure your wife has created does not violate any law. It does not violate your prenuptial agreement, which I'll remind you was fairly standard, and did not include provisions around independent business activity. And the debt positions she holds in your subsidiaries are held legitimately. They were acquired through market transactions. She didn't steal anything, she bought it." "She used our marriage as cover," Ryan said. "She let me think she was just—" "She let you not ask questions," Douglas said, "which is different." A pause. "Ryan, has she done anything at all to your knowledge that crosses a legal line?" Ryan thought about the compliance review that had frozen his corporate cards. He thought about how Gerald had described it, an automated trigger, possibly initiated by an authorized signatory. "The compliance review," he said. "Was she the authorized signatory?" "Yes." "Did she have the right to initiate it?" A long, painful pause. "Yes," he said. "Then that's legal too," Douglas said. He let that sit for a moment. "Ryan, I think what you're describing is not a legal problem. I think you're describing a marriage problem, and that's a different kind of call." Ryan hung up without saying goodbye. Friday came and Ryan moved through the day like a man walking underwater. He attended 2 events with Madison. He smiled when he was supposed to smile. He shook the right hands, but everywhere he went, the thing that Charles had said kept moving through his mind like a tide. Come home alone. Come home alone. And underneath that, always underneath it, was the other thing, the thing he could not stop circling, the image of Victoria in their kitchen, making his coffee, watching him leave. She knew. That morning she already knew everything, and she had made his coffee anyway. She had said, of course, when he mentioned the Hartley dinner. She had stood in that kitchen with 19 years of their life between them and let him walk out the door and said goodbye with 2 words that he had not until this moment heard correctly. She had said, "I never do." He had asked her not to wait up, and she had said, "I never do." Not as defeat, not as resignation, as information, as fact. He stopped in the middle of a corridor at a Fashion Week event on Friday afternoon, people flowing around him in both directions, the noise and color of the industry filling every space, and he understood, standing very still, that his wife had been several moves ahead of him for years, and that he had never once tried to understand the game because he had never believed she was playing one. That was the most devastating thing. Not the money, not the structure, not even the board knowing before he did. It was the realization that he had looked at his wife for 19 years and seen furniture, background, reliability without agency presence, without power. And she had looked back at him the whole time and seen exactly what he was and exactly what she needed to do about it, and had gone ahead and done it while he wasn't watching. He was still standing there when his phone rang. It was an unknown number, Paris area code. He answered. "Mr. Sterling." A woman's voice, composed, French accented. "My name is Isabelle Laurent. I believe we have some mutual interests to discuss." Ryan went very still. "Ms. Laurent." "I wanted to reach out personally," Isabelle said, "to confirm your attendance at Saturday's show. We want to make sure your experience is everything it should be." There was something in her voice, a warmth that was too careful, a hospitality that was too precise. "I'll be there," Ryan said. Wonderful. You and your guest will have excellent seats. Front row center. Very visible. A pause that lasted exactly 1 beat too long. I do hope you enjoy the collection. It's very personal. Very revealing. She said goodbye and hung up before he could respond. Ryan stood with his phone in his hand and heard in the word revealing an entire sentence he hadn't been meant to miss. He called Madison. She was back at the hotel. He told her they needed to talk. When he got to the room, she was sitting on the bed with her knees pulled up and her phone face down beside her, which meant she had been thinking rather than scrolling, which was its own kind of signal. "Something's happening tomorrow night," he said. He sat in the chair across from her. "At the show. I don't know exactly what, but I need you to understand that it might not be what we expected." "Are you telling me to leave?" she asked. He opened his mouth, closed it. "Because," she said, "I've been sitting here for 2 hours, Ryan. I've been thinking about what you asked me at breakfast, about your wife. And I've been thinking about the hotel and the cards and the way every person in this industry seems to know something we don't. And I've been thinking about the fact that you still haven't called her. Not once since we landed." "That's not—" "You know she's here," Madison said. "You know she's here and you haven't called her and you haven't told me what you know, and I'm sitting in a hotel room in Paris feeling like the last person in the world to find out the punchline of a joke I didn't know I was in." Her voice didn't break. That surprised him. He had expected tears. Madison was expressive emotional in ways he had sometimes found exhausting and sometimes found touching. But there were no tears now. Just that flat, clear-eyed honesty that people sometimes find when they're past the point of pretending. "She's here," he confirmed. "I think she's been here since the beginning." Madison looked at him for a long time. "And tomorrow night, I think she's been building to something. Something public." "Public," Madison repeated. She let the word sit there. Then, "How public?" He didn't answer, because he didn't know the full answer, and what he suspected was worse than what he could say out loud. Madison got up from the bed. She went to the window. She stood with her back to him for a moment, and Ryan looked at her young, determined completely in over her head, and felt something that might, in different circumstances, have been protectiveness. "I should go home," she said. "Yes," he said. She turned around. She looked at him with an expression he would remember for a long time, not heartbroken, not angry, but something more adult than either of those things. Disappointed. Not in him specifically. In herself for having believed the version of the story she'd been told. "Did you love her?" Madison asked. "Your wife. Once. Did you—" He didn't answer immediately, and in that hesitation was more truth than anything he'd said all week. "Yes," he said finally. "I did." "What happened?" "I stopped paying attention," he said. It was the most honest thing he had said in years, maybe the most honest thing he had said in this entire marriage, and he said it to the wrong woman in the wrong city the night before everything fell apart. Madison nodded slowly. She picked up her phone. She started looking at flights. She didn't make a scene. She didn't demand explanations. She just started solving the problem of getting herself out, and Ryan watched her and thought she's stronger than I gave her credit for. Just like, and the thought arrived fully formed, unwanted, accurate, just like Victoria. He had a type, it turned out. Strong women who organized their own exits while he wasn't paying attention. He helped her book a morning flight. He called a car for her. He did these things with a strange, quiet efficiency that felt like penance. When she left the next morning, she hugged him briefly at the door, not warmly, but not coldly either. The hug of someone who has made peace with something and is moving on. "For what it's worth," she said at the door, "I think your wife is probably extraordinary." He didn't know what to say to that. He said nothing. The door closed. He stood alone in the junior suite with 1 day left before the show. He thought about not going. He thought about getting on his own plane, flying back to New York, walking into his penthouse and sitting across from Victoria at that kitchen table and having the conversation they had been not having for years. But he didn't. Because something in him, the competitive part, the part that had built an empire on not backing down, needed to see it. Needed to be in the room when it happened. Needed to look his wife in the eye across whatever stage she had prepared and let her know that he understood now, that he saw her, that it had taken him far too long and it had cost far too much, but he finally completely irreversibly saw her. He spent Saturday alone. He walked, he thought, he called nobody. For the first time in 20 years, Ryan Sterling spent an entire day without conducting a single piece of business, and in that silence, in the absence of deals and calls and transactions, he began to hear something he had been drowning out for a very long time. The sound of everything he had taken for granted. By the time he dressed for the show that evening, alone without Derek, without anyone, he was not the same man who had landed in Paris 4 days ago with a champagne glass and a mistress and the absolute certainty that his life was exactly what it appeared to be. He was something quieter, something cracked open. He got in the car. He went to the venue. He handed over his ticket, front row center, most visible position in the house, exactly where Isabelle Laurent had promised him, and he took his seat. The room filled around him. 1,000 people, maybe more. The most powerful names in fashion and luxury and media, camera crews, front row names that magazines would list tomorrow morning. He sat in the center of all of it alone and waited for his wife to show him what she had built. The lights in the room began to dim. Ryan Sterling gripped the arms of his chair, and the show began. The first minute of the show was silence, not the restless, expectant silence of a crowd waiting for something to begin, but a deep, engineered silence, the kind that makes 1,000 people simultaneously stop breathing. The music dropped out mid-note. The runway lights cut to black. And in that darkness, with 1,000 of the most powerful people in European fashion, sitting perfectly still, a single voice came through the sound system. Low, clear, female. It said, "Every empire has a foundation. The question is who laid the stones?" Then the lights came back, and the collection began. Ryan had attended fashion shows before. He had sat front row at events in New York and Milan and Tokyo, and considered them essentially elaborate marketing exercises, expensive, visually interesting, ultimately in service of selling things. He had never once felt anything watching a runway show. He felt something now. The first look that came down the runway was a structured charcoal suit, perfectly tailored. The kind of suit a powerful man would wear to a boardroom, except it was on a woman. And around the jacket's lapel, worked into the fabric in a darker thread that you had to look closely to see, was a pattern of numbers. Financial figures, debt ratios, acquisition dates. Ryan stared. The second look followed immediately, a white dress bridle in its silhouette, but architectural in its construction, as if someone had taken the blueprint of a building and made it into a garment, and embroidered along the hem, barely visible unless you were close, a series of dates. Ryan recognized the earliest one. It was the year he and Victoria married. The woman in the seat to his left leaned toward the woman beside her and murmured something in French. Ryan caught one word. He caught incroyable. The third look came out, then the fourth. Each one told a chapter of something without stating it directly. A gown made of layered contracts, actual printed contracts, laminated into fabric. A coat whose lining, visible only when the model turned, was covered in photographs so small they were indistinct from a distance, but which on the screens, mounted high above the runway, were displayed in sharp, undeniable close-up. Ryan looked at the screens. His vision went very clear the way it sometimes did in moments of extreme stress, hyper-focused everything else peripheral. The photographs on the screens were of him and Madison. At the first cocktail party, at a restaurant on the Rue de Rivoli, at the hotel entrance, photos taken at a distance, unposed, entirely natural, not invasive, nothing that crossed a line, just the ordinary visual record of two people moving through a city together, the kind of photographs that mean nothing in isolation and everything in context. And the context was now being provided in real time by the show itself. The person to his right shifted in their seat. He could feel it, the physical awareness that the person next to him had just made the connection. He didn't look. He kept his eyes on the runway. The fifth look. The sixth. The pace was increasing. The music had come back, low, orchestral building. Each new garment arrived faster than the last, as if the narrative was accelerating towards something, some point of convergence that everyone in the room was beginning to sense, but couldn't yet name. Then the screens changed. The photographs disappeared. What replaced them was text. White text on black, large enough to read from anywhere in the room. It was a message thread. Ryan's name was at the top. So was another name, not Madison's, but the name of a colleague. A business conversation about a deal that had closed 18 months ago. A deal that Ryan had publicly credited entirely to himself. And in the messages visible to 1,000 people in high-resolution clarity was the evidence that the foundational insight behind that deal, the key structural idea that had made it work, had been suggested by Victoria in a text to Ryan, which Ryan had then presented to the board as his own. Someone in the crowd made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound, the involuntary exhale of someone who has seen something they cannot unsee. Ryan felt heat move up the back of his neck. He had forgotten that message thread. He had genuinely, completely forgotten it, which was perhaps the most damning thing of all, that what had been a defining reputation-making moment of his career had been so unremarkable to him in its origins, that he had filed it away and forgotten it, while Victoria had apparently kept every word. The seventh look came out. The model stopped at the end of the runway and turned slowly, and the garment she wore was extraordinary layered silk in deep blue and gold complex and beautiful, and clearly the centerpiece piece of the collection. Embroidered across the back in letters large enough to be read by the front row, a single word: invisible. Ryan stared at that word on the back of a dress in the center of the most important fashion show of the year and felt something break open in his chest that was not anger, not humiliation, not the cold fury of a man losing control. It was something older and quieter and more true than any of those things. It was grief. Raw, unexpected, arriving without permission. The grief of a man who has just understood fully and without mitigation what he threw away, and how long ago he threw it, and how completely he did it without ever once looking at what was in his hands. He gripped the arms of his chair. He did not move. Around him the room was buzzing, not loudly, not chaotically, but with the particular charged energy of a crowd that has understood something and is processing it collectively. Whispers, glances, the soft percussive sound of phones being raised. He noticed one editor, a woman he recognized from a major publication, had turned entirely in her seat to look at him. She wasn't hostile. She was watching with the expression of someone who is witnessing history and knows it. He looked away. The eighth look came down the runway, then the ninth. The narrative was shifting now, pulling back from the specific and moving toward the universal. The garments became more abstract, more architectural. The screen cycled through images that were clearly symbolic rather than documentary, a woman building something with her hands stone by stone in time-lapse, a series of hands signing documents, a key in a lock. Then, between the 9th and 10th looks, the screens went dark again. And the voice came back, that same low, clear female voice from the opening. It said, "The most underestimated person in the room is not the one who says the least. It's the one who has already done the most." The 10th look emerged, and walking beside the model, not on the runway, but stepping out from the wings onto the elevated platform at the runway's head, standing there simply in a dark dress that was not part of the collection. In her own clothes, her own body, her own face, was Victoria Sterling. The room responded to her before anyone had consciously processed what was happening. Applause began somewhere in the middle of the room and spread forward in a wave, and by the time it reached the front row, it was full and sustained and entirely genuine, the kind of applause that fashion crowds, who are notoriously difficult, reserve for moments that matter. Victoria did not smile the way a performer smiles. She did not wave. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her and looked out at the room with that steady, dark-eyed precision that people had spent years mistaking for passivity, and she let the applause come to her. Isabelle Laurent stepped out beside her, then 2 board members from the Marchetti group, both women, both impeccably dressed. Then a man Ryan recognized, Claude Beaumont, 71 years old, in the suit her father would have pressed, who stood slightly to Victoria's left and looked quietly, profoundly proud. Isabelle stepped to the microphone at the platform's edge. "The Laurent Marchetti collection," she said, "is the work of many hands, but its vision belongs to one person, the founder of the Marchetti Group, the majority investor and executive producer of tonight's event, and the woman who has spent 6 years building one of the most significant private equity portfolios in European luxury fashion, Victoria Elaine Sterling." The applause surged again. Victoria inclined her head exactly once, not performing humility, not performing power, just receiving with complete composure what she had earned. Ryan sat in the front row and did not applaud, not because he was angry, the anger had gone somewhere he couldn't locate right now, but because his hands would not cooperate. They were pressed flat against his thighs. He was holding himself very still the way a person does when they are afraid that if they move, something will shatter. Victoria's eyes moved across the room, unhurried. She was not looking for him. She was looking at everything she had built and everything she had earned and taking a moment to see it clearly before the world claimed it. But then her eyes found him, front row center, exactly where Isabel had placed him. And they looked at each other. Ryan Sterling and Victoria Sterling across a runway in Paris in front of 1,000 witnesses. His face did something he had no control over. He didn't know exactly what it was doing. He knew only that it was true, more honest than he had been in years, and that she could read it perfectly because she had always been able to read him perfectly even when he hadn't bothered to return the skill. Her expression did not change. That was the thing that reached into him and stayed. She looked at him with those dark eyes, and her face did not move. Not with triumph, not with satisfaction, not with the righteous anger he would have understood and could have handled. She looked at him with something he recognized after a moment as the specific exhaustion of someone who no longer needs to feel anything about a situation because the situation is resolved. She had already done her grieving. She had done it quietly, privately, in the years when he had been elsewhere, and now there was nothing left for his face to provoke. That was worse than any version of anger. That was the truth of what he had lost, stated not in words, but in the simple, unmoving steadiness of her expression. She looked away first, calmly, without urgency, as if returning her attention to more important things. The lights changed. Music swelled. The show moved into its final sequence. Ryan sat through the rest of it without seeing any of it. His mind was somewhere else entirely, back in a kitchen in Philadelphia 21 years ago, watching a young woman with dark eyes tell him she believed in his idea. Back in a New York apartment, early days, kitchen tables covered in napkins. Back in the morning light of their penthouse this past Tuesday, when she had stood at the window and watched his car pull away. The show ended to a standing ovation. Ryan stood because the room stood because his body operated on social autopilot, while his mind was somewhere it had never been before, completely honest with itself. The next 90 minutes were the longest of his life. He made his way through the departing crowd with the specific difficulty of a man who has become suddenly visible when he had expected to remain anonymous. People he had greeted earlier in the week with easy confidence now created a different energy around him. Not hostile, not cruel, just aware. In the way that a room becomes aware of a person who has just had their story publicly revised. He heard his name said in 3 different languages. He heard Victoria's name said in 10. He tried to find her. He moved through the crowd toward the platform where she had been standing, asking an event coordinator, then a security person, then Isabelle Laurent herself, who appeared in front of him with the composed pleasantness of a woman who was entirely unsurprised to see him. "Ms. Laurent," he said, "where is my wife?" "She's in a meeting," Isabelle said. "I need to speak with her." "I understand, she's aware. She'll be in touch when she's available." "She's my wife," he said. "I flew to Paris." "You flew to Paris," Isabelle said gently, "with someone else." "Victoria flew to Paris to do her job." A pause. "She's very good at her job, Monsieur Sterling, as I think you now understand." She smiled, not unkindly, and excused herself. Ryan stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he took out his phone and called Victoria directly. It rang 4 times. Then, "You've reached Victoria Sterling. Please leave a message." He hadn't heard her voicemail recording in years. He hadn't called her directly in. He tried to remember. Weeks more. He listened to her voice say those 11 words, and then he said after the beep into the recording that she would hear later in her own time on her own terms. "It's me. I'm here. I need to talk to you." He hung up. He went back to the hotel. He sat in the junior suite, the room that should have been the penthouse, the room that had started telling him the truth before he was ready to hear it, and he waited. His phone, which had been relatively quiet since Gerald's call, now started producing notifications at a rate he recognized from crises past. News items, social media flags. His PR firm calling, then calling again. Derek calling 4 times in succession. He answered Derek. "Mr. Sterling," Derek said, and his voice had the specific, careful modulation of an assistant delivering catastrophic news to a powerful person. "The show, it's the coverage, is significant." "I know," Ryan said. "The message thread that was on the screens, the Hartley deal, the press is, I know Derek. The board is calling an emergency meeting for Monday. Mr. Whitfield asked me to tell you that attendance is that it's not optional." "I'll be there," Ryan said. "And there's something else." Derek paused. "The Marchetti Group filed documentation today with the relevant regulatory bodies formally disclosing its positions in the Sterling subsidiary companies. It was time to coincide with tonight. The filing is public. The financial press has it." Ryan closed his eyes. "The filing," Derek continued, and Ryan could hear him reading directly from something, "designates V.E. Marchetti as an interested party with material influence over said subsidiaries and formally notifies the Sterling board of the potential for an accelerated debt review within 60 days. 60 days. Victoria had given him 60 days before she could legally and entirely within her rights call the debt that would restructure everything. "Thank you, Derek," he said. "That's all." He set the phone down. He thought about calling Charles Whitfield. He thought about calling Douglas Webb. He thought about the 10 different calls he should be making right now. The crisis management playbook he knew by heart. The actions a man in his position was supposed to take in the first hours after a public event like this. He made none of those calls. Instead, he sat in this chair by the window and did something he had not done in a very long time. He sat with the consequences of his own choices, not strategically, not in terms of how to manage them or minimize them or spin them, just sat with them. Let them be exactly what they were. He had ignored his wife for years, not maliciously, not with deliberate cruelty, but with the casual, habitual disregard of a man who had decided somewhere along the way that the most important person in his world had finished becoming important and was now simply permanent. Furniture, background, part of the house. And while he had been doing that, while he had been looking at his phone and taking his mistress to Paris and presenting his wife's ideas as his own in boardrooms, she had been building something extraordinary, with discipline, with patience, with a quality of attention to detail that he recognized with a jolt as exactly what had made him successful in the first place. She had learned from the best, and then she had surpassed him. He was still sitting there when his phone rang. Unknown number, New York area code. He answered. "Mr. Sterling?" A woman's voice, professional, crisp. "This is Patricia Hale." He sat up. "Ms. Hale. I'm calling on behalf of my client, Victoria Sterling, to inform you that she is aware of your attempts to contact her this evening and that she will make herself available for a conversation when she returns to New York." A pause. "She asked me to relay one message specifically." "What message?" he said. Patricia Hale's voice was completely neutral when she said it, the practiced neutrality of someone reading a message whose contents they find deeply satisfying. She said, "The Hartley dinner is Tuesday. I've already taken care of it." Ryan was very still. Patricia continued. "She'll see you at home on Monday. She suggests you have your own counsel present." The call ended. Ryan sat with the phone in his hand. "The Hartley dinner is Tuesday. I've already taken care of it, delivered through a lawyer, across an ocean, days after everything had collapsed. His wife was still managing his life, still keeping track of the details he forgot, still making sure the things that needed handling were handled. And in that small, devastating fact in the continuation of her care, even now, even after all of it, he understood something that no legal filing or financial structure or public runway revelation had managed to convey as completely. Victoria had not stopped loving him out of anger. She had not built her empire out of revenge. She had done it out of self-preservation. She had done it because a woman with that much intelligence and capability and love cannot survive indefinitely in a life where none of those things are acknowledged. She had needed to become visible to herself even after he had made her invisible to him. And now she was the most visible woman in European fashion. And he was sitting alone in a junior suite in Paris, with 60 days before the woman he had taken for granted for 19 years decided what to do with everything she held. He picked up his phone one more time. He didn't call anyone. He opened a note and began to write. Not a strategy, not talking points for the board meeting, not a crisis management outline. Just the truth. The things he should have said across a kitchen table years ago. The things a man says when he is finally done pretending he doesn't know exactly what he did. He wrote for a long time. Outside, Paris continued its evening without him. Beautiful and indifferent, the way it had always been. The way Victoria had always been there, solid and extraordinary. The way the best things in a man's life often are, until the day they aren't anymore. He wrote until his hands were tired. Then he stopped. He read what he had written. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was honest, and honesty, he was learning, was where you had to start. He closed the note. He booked a morning flight to New York. He left Paris on Sunday alone, carrying nothing he had arrived with except the luggage. The confidence, the certainty, the comfortable belief that the world was organized according to his importance, all of that he left behind in a junior suite in a hotel his wife partly owned. He walked through Charles de Gaulle Airport with his head down, no assistant, no entourage, no first-class swagger. Just a man going home to face the life he had built and then neglected and now had to reckon with. At the gate, he passed a newsstand. The morning papers were out. 3 of them had photographs from the show. 2 of them had Victoria's name in the headline. He stopped. He looked at one photograph, in particular Victoria on that platform, composed, unsmiling, completely certain of herself, in a way that he had never once stopped to appreciate when she had been standing in his kitchen. She was extraordinary. She had always been extraordinary. He had simply never looked long enough to see it. He bought the paper. He folded it carefully. He carried it onto the plane. And on the flight home somewhere over the Atlantic, Ryan Sterling did something he could not remember doing since he was very young and very frightened and very new to the world. He cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly in a window seat above the ocean for the man he could have been, and the marriage he could have had, and the woman who had deserved so much better than the life he had given her. He cried for a while. Then he stopped. He dried his face. He looked out at the Atlantic. He still had 60 days. And for the first time in 19 years, Ryan Sterling had no idea what was going to happen next. No plan, no angle, no certainty, just the truth. And the question of whether the truth at this point was anywhere near enough. He landed at JFK on a Sunday morning, and the city received him the way it receives everyone, without ceremony, without judgment, without any particular interest in what had happened to him across the ocean. He took a car home, no Derek, no assistant. He carried his own bag through the lobby of the building he and Victoria had lived in for 11 years, and the doorman, a steady man named Arthur, who had worked the desk for 9 of those years, greeted him with a nod that was professional and warm and revealed absolutely nothing about whether Arthur knew what had happened in Paris. Ryan suspected he did. He suspected everyone did. He nodded back and got in the elevator and rode up to the penthouse in silence. The apartment was quiet when he walked in. He stood in the entryway for a moment, adjusting to the silence. The morning light was doing something through the windows. The kitchen was clean. There was a single coffee cup on the counter, used rinsed set to dry, and the sight of it hit him somewhere low and specific in the chest. Victoria was home. He found her in the study. She was at her desk reading something on her laptop, and she looked up when he appeared in the doorway with the calm, unhurried expression of someone who has been expecting this moment and decided in advance exactly how they were going to receive it. She was not in armor. She was not performing coldness. She was simply herself, steady, clear-eyed, composed in the way that had taken him 19 years to understand was not passivity, but mastery. "You got in early," she said. "First flight I could get," he said. She nodded. She closed the laptop. "Do you want coffee?" "Victoria, I'm going to make coffee," she said. "You can come to the kitchen or you can wait." She got up and walked past him, and he followed her because what else was there to do? They moved to the kitchen together, the kitchen where she had made his coffee Tuesday morning while he was on the phone telling someone she never asks anymore. And she put the kettle on with the precise, unhurried movements of a woman doing something she has done 10,000 times. Ryan stood on the other side of the counter and watched her. "I want to say something," he said. "In a minute," she said. She was not being cruel. She was managing the pace of this conversation the way she managed everything deliberately on her own timeline. He waited. She made the coffee. She set a cup in front of him. She wrapped both hands around her own cup and looked at him across the counter and said, "Okay." He had written a page and a half on the plane. Honest things, true things. He had read them back twice and thought they were sufficient, and now standing in front of her in their kitchen, he understood they were completely insufficient. Not because they were wrong, but because she deserved more than a page and a half and more than the 5 days it had taken Paris to make him see what 19 years at home had not. "I don't know where to start," he said. "I know," she said, not unkindly. "I want to tell you that I know what I did. Not the affair, I mean, yes, the affair, but more than that. I want to tell you that I understand what I did to you over years, the way I stopped seeing you, the way I took what you gave, and I never once—" He stopped. He pressed his hands flat on the counter. "I presented your idea to the board," he said. "The Hartley deal. That was yours and I—" "I know," she said. "I don't think I even knew I was doing it," he said. That might be the worst part. I genuinely didn't register it as something I'd taken from you. I just absorbed it, because that's what I did with everything you gave me. I absorbed it and forgot where it came from." Victoria looked at him steadily. She did not fill the silence with reassurance. She did not soften what he was saying by telling him it was okay. It wasn't okay, and she was not going to tell him it was because she respected them both too much for that. "The morning I left," he said, "you heard me on the phone." "Yes," she said. "You heard everything." "I heard enough," she said, "and you still made the coffee." "Old habit," she said, but the way she said it flat honest made clear that she knew what the habit had cost her and had already decided to stop paying that particular price. He looked at his coffee cup. "Are you going to call the debt?" he asked. "The 60-day review." She was quiet for a moment. Not because she hadn't decided, but because she was deciding how much of her decision to share and when. "That's a business question," she said finally. "I don't think we're at the business questions yet." "What are we at?" "We're at the personal ones," she said. "The ones you should have asked years ago." He looked at her. "What do you want, Victoria?" She considered that question with the seriousness it deserved, which was the seriousness he had never given it before, and the fact that she had to consider it, that the answer wasn't immediate and obvious, that she had to actually search for it, told him more about the damage than anything that had happened in Paris. "I want," she said slowly, "to be someone who is known by the person who is supposed to know me." She paused. "I spent 19 years being unknown in my own home. I became V.E. Marchetti because Victoria Sterling had become invisible. I had to go somewhere else to be seen." She looked at him. "You never asked me what I was working on. Not once in 3 years. You sat across from me at dinner, and you talked about your deals and your board and your problems, and you never once said what's keeping you busy lately, Vic. Not once." The words were not accusatory. They were simply accurate, delivered with the precision of a woman who has had 3 years to distill the truth of her marriage down to its essential components. "You're right," he said. He didn't add anything to that. He didn't explain or contextualize or mitigate. He just let it be true. "I know I'm right," she said. "That's not the question." "What's the question?" She looked at him for a long time. "The question," she said, "is whether any of this matters now, whether knowing it changes anything, or whether it's just information, something you understand too late to use." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the city continued its Sunday morning. Down below on the street, people were living their lives buying coffee, walking dogs, existing in the ordinary, uncomplicated present tense of people who had not just had their lives restructured by the person they loved. "I don't know," Ryan said. "I don't know if it changes anything. I can't promise you things I don't know, but I know that I understand something now that I didn't understand before, and I would rather tell you the truth about not knowing than tell you something false, because it's more comfortable." Victoria looked at him. Something moved in her face, a small, barely there shift, like the first light on a morning when you couldn't be sure yet if it was going to be a good day or not. "That's the first completely honest thing you've said to me in a long time," she said. "I know," he said. She picked up her coffee. She drank. She set it down. "I have a meeting with Patricia and Claude on Wednesday," she said. We're going to discuss the structure of the next phase of the Marchetti Group. There are 3 new acquisition targets in the pipeline and a potential IPO conversation we're being approached about. He blinked. The shift in register was so abrupt from the raw personal to the clean professional that it took him a moment to follow. I'm telling you, she continued, because it will affect certain things, publicly. Our name will be associated with the Marchetti Group more directly going forward. If the marriage is still... She paused. It will affect how things look. You should know. Victoria, he said, are you telling me our marriage is still... I'm telling you, she said carefully, that I haven't made all my decisions yet, that some of them will take longer than a Sunday morning conversation. She looked at him with absolute directness. I'm not going to make you a promise right now that I don't know if I can keep, because that's what you would have done. And I'm not you. It was not cruel. It was the truest thing anyone had ever said to him, and it landed in him like the first honest mirror he'd looked into in decades. Okay, he said. I understand. There's the board meeting tomorrow, she said. Patricia has already communicated to Charles Whitfield that the Marchetti Group will not be initiating an accelerated debt review at this time. She paused. Consider it a period of consideration. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said. It's a business decision. The subsidiaries are more valuable stable than distressed. Don't make it personal. But it was personal. They both knew it was personal. She was giving him room to exist. Professional room, temporary room. The minimum viable space for a man to stand in while he figured out if he was capable of becoming someone different. She was not forgiving him. She was not taking him back. She was leaving a door open exactly 1 inch and telling him that what he did with that inch was entirely his own problem. The Monday board meeting was the worst professional experience of Ryan Sterling's life, which was saying something because he had been through hostile acquisitions and regulatory investigations and a market crash that had nearly wiped him out in 2018. He walked in alone. No Derek. He had told his assistant to take the week. He sat at the head of the table from force of habit, and no one told him not to. But the energy in the room was different. Charles Whitfield sat to his left with the careful face of a man trying to be fair. Gerald Marsh sat 2 seats down, looking at his legal pad. 4 other board members arranged themselves with the particular formality of people who have discussed something extensively before you arrived. Douglas Webb sat against the wall. He had his briefcase open. He was ready. Ryan spoke first. I know why we're here, he said. Let's not spend time establishing the situation. I'm aware of it. Charles looked at him. Ryan. Let me finish, Ryan said. The Hartley deal attribution is an issue. The personal conduct in Paris is an issue. The Marchetti Group's positions are an issue. I understand all 3. He looked around the table. What I want to know from this board is what you believe is necessary, and whether any of you believe that the company is better served by my departure than my continued involvement. The silence that followed that question was exactly as long as it needed to be. Gerald said very quietly, We don't think departure is necessary, Ryan. What do you think is necessary? Accountability, Charles said. Public acknowledgement of the Hartley situation specifically, and some structural adjustments to governance, given the personal circumstances and the public nature of... Agreed, Ryan said. Charles blinked. You. Agreed, Ryan said again. All of it. Draw it up. I'll sign whatever is appropriate. If the company needs a transition of certain responsibilities while I address what needs addressing, tell me what that looks like, and I'll cooperate. The board was quiet. They had clearly prepared for a fight. Ryan Sterling always fought. It was his defining characteristic, the thing that had made him a legend, and also he now understood the thing that had destroyed his marriage. He fought everything. He never surrendered. He never admitted. He never sat in a room and said, You're right, I need to be accountable for this. He said it now, and the effect in the room was extraordinary, not celebratory, not cruel, but the specific, sobered quiet of people watching a powerful person do something genuinely difficult. We'll draft the proposal by end of day, Charles said carefully. Good, Ryan said. I'll be here. He was there all day. He signed things. He read things. He answered questions with a directness that he could tell made people slightly uncomfortable because they had been braced for evasion. By 6 in the evening, a preliminary governance restructure had been outlined, and Ryan Sterling had formally accepted a 90-day accountability review of certain executive decisions going back 3 years, including the Hartley deal. He drove home alone. He walked in to find the apartment smelling like food. Real food made from scratch, the kind his wife cooked when she had worked through something difficult. He followed the smell to the kitchen and found Victoria at the stove. She looked up briefly when he came in. "Hartley called," she said. "About Tuesday." "Is it handled?" he asked. "I handled it this morning," she said. And then she said without looking up from the stove, "You should call him yourself. Thank him directly. He's been a good partner for a long time." It was the kind of thing she had always done quietly, directing him toward the gracious choice, the relationship-preserving move, the detail that he would overlook because he was too busy thinking about the next big thing. He had taken that for granted for 19 years. He felt it differently now, like being given something you didn't deserve, and knowing you didn't deserve it, and receiving it anyway carefully with both hands. "I will," he said. "Thank you." She nodded. She went back to the stove. He did not eat with her that night. She set his plate on the counter and took hers to the study, and he understood that was the current arrangement, living in proximity, managing the practical existing in the same space, while the larger questions remained unresolved. It was not a reconciliation. It was a ceasefire. He accepted the terms. In the weeks that followed, Ryan Sterling did something that no magazine profile had ever described him doing and no investor had ever seen him do. He listened. He asked questions. He sat with the answers instead of immediately strategizing around them. He called Hartley. He called 3 other long-standing business contacts and had conversations that started with him saying, "I want to acknowledge that I may not have given you the credit you were due." Some of those calls were brief and uncomfortable. A couple of them turned into something longer and more honest than he expected. One of them, a conversation with an engineer who had worked for him in the early days and whom he had not spoken to in 6 years, lasted 2 hours and ended with both men saying things they had needed to say for a long time. He started going to the office later. He stopped checking his phone during the hours between 6 and 8 in the morning, which were the hours when the apartment was quiet, and Victoria was working at her desk, and the city was just beginning, and life was happening at a human pace instead of a transactional one. He did not ask her to forgive him again. He had said it once clearly in the kitchen, and she had received it without responding, and he understood that the response, if there ever was one, was not going to come from him asking again. It was going to come, if it came at all, from what he did. 6 weeks after Paris, the Marchetti Group announced a partnership with a major American retail conglomerate, the first significant U.S.-facing deal in the portfolio's history. Victoria gave one interview about it to a business publication, and in the interview, she said something that Ryan read 3 times in a row in his car outside his office building. The interviewer had asked her about her background, about how she had developed her financial instincts. And Victoria had said, "I learned by paying very close attention to someone who was very good at it, and then I learned by going further." He sat with that for a long time. The interview did not mention his name. It didn't need to. The question of the 60-day review had quietly resolved itself into something longer, an ongoing reassessment. Patricia had told Douglas that the Marchetti Group was content to let remain open-ended for the present. Douglas had communicated this to Ryan with the carefully neutral expression of a lawyer who understands that his client has been extended a mercy that is not his to explain. 8 weeks after Paris, on a Wednesday evening, Victoria came to find him in the living room where he was reading a book, something he had not done in years, and she stood in the doorway and said, "I've been thinking." He put down the book. "Tell me." She came in. She sat not on the couch next to him, but in the chair across, maintaining space, maintaining the geometry of their current arrangement. She folded her hands in her lap. "I'm not coming back to what we were," she said. "I need you to understand that completely and without qualification. The marriage we had, the structure of it, the dynamic, that is not something I am willing to return to." "I know," he said. "But I'm also—" She stopped. She looked at her hands. Then she looked at him, and for the first time since he had come home from Paris, her face showed something other than composure. It showed the effort composure cost, the work it was, the thing underneath it that was still, despite everything, not entirely gone. "I'm not finished with you," she said. "I don't know what that means yet. I don't know if there's a version of this that works, but I'm not finished." Ryan felt something unlock in his chest that had been locked for months, years maybe. "Tell me what you need," he said. "I need you to be a person I can actually see," she said. "Not a CEO, not a brand, not the man who runs the room. I need to know if there is a Ryan Sterling that is none of those things, and whether that person is someone I can know." She paused. "I haven't seen him, not in a very long time, maybe not ever." "I don't know if I know him either," Ryan said honestly. "That's the right answer," she said. "That's the only honest answer." They sat in the quiet of the living room, the city outside, the evening settling. "I want to try," he said. "I don't know what I'm trying toward, but I want to try." She looked at him for a long time. "Then try," she said simply, "and we'll see." She got up. She went back to her study. She had a call with Claude in 20 minutes about a Luxembourg entity that needed restructuring. She had 3 acquisition targets in her pipeline and an IPO conversation, and a second collection already in early design discussions with Isabel. She had an empire to run, her empire built in the space his inattention had created, built on the foundation of everything she had quietly, precisely, extraordinarily become while the world was looking elsewhere. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop and pulled up the deal memo and started working. Ryan sat in the living room with his book open on his lap and the city going on outside, and something shifting very slowly inside him, not the fast, confident motion of a man who has figured something out, but the slow, uncertain movement of a person beginning to learn, beginning at 45 years old to ask the questions he should have asked at 25, beginning to look carefully and without agenda at the life around him. He thought about what Victoria had said. "I'm not finished with you." He knew what those words did and did not mean. They were not a promise. They were not absolution. They were 4 words that meant only exactly what they said and asked him to earn everything else. He thought about his father-in-law in the tailor shop in Philadelphia, pressing the suits of men who called him sir and never learned his name. He thought about a 10-year-old girl watching from upstairs and learning that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone has already dismissed. He thought about himself, who he had been, what he had done, what it had cost. He picked up his phone. He opened the note he had written on the plane from Paris, the page and a half of honest things he had decided were insufficient. He read through it. He added to it. Not because he was going to give it to her, not as a strategy or a bid for forgiveness. He wrote it because the truth needed to exist somewhere, even if only in a note on his phone that no one else would read. He wrote until the words ran out. Then he closed the note and sat in the quiet. In the study down the hall, Victoria Sterling was building the next chapter of her life with the same discipline and precision and quiet ferocity that had built everything that came before. She was not waiting for him. She was not organizing her existence around his choices. She was, as she had always been, moving forward on her own terms, at her own pace toward a future that belonged entirely to her. Whether he was part of that future was a question only time and his own actions could answer. But the door was open 1 inch, and Ryan Sterling, for the first time in 19 years, was paying attention. Not to the next deal, not to the board, not to the image or the empire or the reputation, to the woman down the hall, to the only thing that had ever actually mattered. He had learned it too late to get back what was lost, but he had learned it. And that truth, small, hard, irreversible, was the only foundation he had left to build anything real on. The empire survives, but now it belongs to her. And she was never the woman standing beside him. She was the woman who built the ground beneath his feet and had the strength and the grace and the absolute precision of a woman who knows her own worth to take it back.